As many of you know, I make my living as a Canadian history podcaster. And the two most common questions that I receive are how do you make a living doing that? And what got you interested in Canadian history? Well, to answer the first question, it's very easy. Donations from listeners, support through Patreon, and ads. Beautiful, beautiful ads. The second one takes a bit more explanation. Madam Toastmaster and fellow Sundowners. I've always loved history, but Canadian history actually wasn't always my jam. I liked ancient history, stories of Rome and Greece and Carthage and Egypt. I enjoyed stories of the Middle Ages and was always ready for an entertaining story about the Crusades. Gary caught it. Then my mind started to turn towards Canadian history, and there were three things that led me down that route. The first were the Heritage Minutes. The second was Canada, A People's History. However, above all else, there was one person who influenced me along this path. He was my history mentor, and he showed me that Canadian history could be interesting. You just had to look for it. He didn't have to talk about speeches and government bills and boring politicians. You could talk about the regular people who lived and died through our history. My history mentor was born in 1920 in Dawson City, Yukon. He died 19 years ago in Toronto. Between 1920 and 2004, he wrote 50 books and became an icon of Canada whose name was known coast to coast. He taught Canadians about the amazing parts of their history and why we should both celebrate it, but also confront parts of our past. He even once taught Canadians how to roll a joint on the Rick Mercer Report. My mentor was this guy, Pierre Berton. Now you may be thinking, wow, you knew him. No, I didn't. I never met him in my life. Yet I did know him. I knew him through his books. I've read many of his books. In fact, I'm reading his book, Prisoners of the North, right now, which was released in 2004, the year he died. And by reading his books, I feel as though I knew him. I feel as though I was his protege. Humans have this wonderful form of telepathy. Somebody takes thoughts in their heads, makes marks on a piece of paper, and then sends it out into the world. Then another person comes along, reads those same marks, and the thoughts of that other person are now in their head. When I'm asked what my goal is with writing about Canadian history, it's simple. I want to be the Pierre Berton of the 21st century. But it's not an easy task to live up to my mentor. Did I mention he wrote 50 books? I'm struggling to write one. He narrated an Oscar-winning National Film Board documentary. He was a permanent panelist on Front Page Challenge for nearly 40 years. He has the Order of Canada. He has a star on Canada's Walk of Fame. And yes, Canada has a Walk of Fame. A lot of people don't seem to know that. He won 3 Governor General Awards for creative nonfiction. He has 13 honorary degrees. I have 1 degree, and it wasn't honorary. So how am I supposed to live up to the standard that my mentor set? Well, I won't, and that's okay. My mentor taught me that it's okay to just be yourself and to be entertaining. Did I mention that he smoked marijuana for 4 decades and went on national television as an 84-year-old man 2 months before he died to roll a joint using his book Prisoners of the North as a rolling surface? That was 13 years before Canada legalized marijuana. He taught me that when you share Canadian history, you can make it something that people enjoy. He taught me that you don't need to talk about the Arctic as a series of treaties between politicians transferring control between themselves. You could talk about the explorers who risked life and limb to venture into the wintry wild. He taught me that as a historian, you also didn't just have to write about history. You could write about cats, like he did in 2002 with his book, Cats I Have Known and Loved. He showed me you could write a fantasy adventure novel if you felt like it, like he did in 1961 with his book, The Secret World of Og. That was also his favorite book of all the books he ever wrote. You could write a cookbook, just like he did in 1966 with his wife, Janet. He taught me that you could just write what you love. Now, can you call yourself a protege when the person is not physically around you, mentoring you through life? I think you can. People read self-help books to find some sort of guidance. Is that not mentoring? There are people who watch cooking shows to learn to be a better cook. Is that not mentoring? I think the answer to both of those questions is yes. And that is how it was for myself and Pierre Berton. Sure, he was born 60 years before me. Sure, I never met him. Sure, he died when I was in my early 20s. But does that disqualify him from being my mentor? It does not. When I first read Berton, I felt like he was teaching directly to me, telling me a fascinating story, and he didn't mind mixing in his own little anecdotes and bits of humor. But most of all, Pierre Berton, as my mentor, taught me something that has helped me find success with what I do. He taught me that if you have a passion for something, follow it. I've always loved history. History has always been there in my life. It was there when I was a computer programmer. It was there when I was a journalist. And eventually, I just decided to go with it. And Pierre Berton taught me that. We may have never met, but Pierre Berton was my mentor, and I was his unofficial protege. And I'm Toastmaster.